one's stopping us from doing the things we need to do. We have money in Europe. We could flood Ukraine with the money it needs to buy the weapons it needs to turn the tide of the war. We can do that. We can put I'm working on another thing which is going to be launched very shortly, which is an idea to put Western warplanes into Ukraine to at least protect the rear from Russian missile, drone and air attacks.
Edward Lucas has been covering Eastern European affairs and Russia since 1986. He's a Times columnist, senior advisor at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. He joins me now. Edward Lucas, let me come straight to the point and get your take. Is this potentially the beginning of the end for the Atlantic Alliance?
I can't believe I'm saying this. Like you, Andrew, I'm a lifelong Atlanticist, and I know we've had very rocky periods in the past, sometimes our fault, sometimes theirs. But I think this is the end because, as you said in your excellent monologue, and you should make that into a speech and give it somewhere, the trust has gone. Yes, maybe Trump in his whimsical, capricious way will, get cross with Putin. Maybe he'll like the mineral deal. Maybe he'll, in a year's time, it may all look a bit different. But the memories of the way America behaved and the memories of the things that he said, and not just that he said, but people we really thought were reasonably trustworthy around him, those leave very deep wounds and scars. So I think it's no longer NATO. It may be NATO, the North European Treaty Organization. We may be able to do something with Canada. We may find new allies in Japan and South Korea. But I'm afraid that the world that we have grown up with has just ended.
Fascinating to hear you say that, Edward. And what you said there takes me on exactly to my next question. And you've kind of implied it may be one potential answer. And my question is this: can there be a new version of NATO, sort of NATO 2.0, without America?
The answer is, in the long term, yes, because here in Europe and in the West more broadly, we have an enormous lump of economic, political, diplomatic clout. We have, $20 trillion GDP. We have 500 million people. Add the Japanese, the South Koreans, there's still a lot of the West left. The problem is that we are joined at the hip with the Americans and all the military stuff that matters right now. So just imagine, for example, that you are Finland, Poland, Denmark, or Norway, core frontline states who really get the threat. And over the last 5, 10, 15 years, you've invested heavily in the most modern American weapons, the F-35, the JASSM, which is their super stealthy cruise missile. And you're now suddenly realizing these weapons may not work when you need them. Just imagine Russia makes an incursion into Finland or Norway or Baltic states or wherever, and you want to use your F-35 or your JASSM, say, to flatten the air defences in Kaliningrad, that Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea. And you turn these weapons on and a little screen flashes saying software update needed. Well, it's the same for us with our nuclear deterrent. We have a few years' worth of missiles, but they need regular servicing. The nuclear warheads are shared with the United States. If Trump doesn't want American weapons used, allies won't be able to use them. And this is a really scary prospect for us.
I would suggest that Europe should operate on the assumption that this pause in the arms sales or arms supplies to Ukraine could easily become permanent. We don't know, but I think it would be prudent to assume it would. If we do proceed on that basis, what should Europe be doing in the next 6 months?
The most important thing is to keep weapons and money going into Ukraine. It's a paradox that the Ukrainian defense industry is only working at about half capacity because of shortages of money and to some extent of electricity. So the Ukrainians are increasingly making the weapons they need. You'll remember at the beginning of the war, this tremendous sort of idea, we need tanks and we need huge numbers we need howitzers and artillery, and we need more vehicles, and we need shells and shells and shells. And that's really changing now. And they're still important, but basically vehicles don't get within 10 kilometers of the front line because they get whacked by the other side's drones. So we're now in a kind of warfare which is both very very, very high tech, with the sort of absolutely latest cutting edge drones that our military would never be able to get a handle on, coupled with very old fashioned warfare, where you use maps and compasses because your electronic devices don't work. I spoke to someone yesterday who said the Ukrainians are thinking of getting carrier pigeons as a way of getting messages back from the front line, because carrier pigeons can't be hit by Russian electronic warfare, and Russian drones can't fly fast enough to shoot them down.
How interesting is that? I did learn that almost 55% of the military hardware Ukraine's using is being generated by Ukraine's own arms manufacturing. So there is, and a lot of it drones. So there's something happening there. Now, Brussels is looking at the EU borrowing collectively to pay for defence. You've talked about a rearmament bank in Europe. Germany and France now support, or might now support, redirecting frozen Russian assets to Ukraine at a pretty miserable time. At least we're not short of options if we have the gumption to take them.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. And I think there's 2 points here. One is we should stop blaming Trump for mistakes we've made ourselves. Nobody made us underspend on defense. Nobody made us open our financial system to Russian dirty money. Nobody made us in Europe dependent on Russian gas. We did all these things to ourselves because we were lazy and naive and most of all greedy. Right. Second, no one's stopping us from doing the things we need to do. We have money in Europe. We could flood Ukraine with the money it needs to buy the weapons it needs to turn the tide of the war. We can do that. We can put I'm working on another thing which is going to be launched very shortly, which is an idea to put Western warplanes into Ukraine to at least protect the rear from Russian missile, drone and air attacks. Then there's the rearmament bank. We can immediately set up a bank for defence which will within months be lending tens and eventually hundreds of billions of euros and pounds and dollars to our defence companies to increase capacity. So we have in our power to save Ukraine and to save ourselves. The only thing that's holding us back at the moment is a lack of political will. And I think that Donald Trump plats in the heart of Brussels with an enormous gold statue of Donald Trump would be a very good way of commemorating in future years his enormous contribution to a truly united and effective Europe. I mean, he knocked Jean Monnet and Schumann and Spark and all these other great founders, Adenauer, these founders into a cocked hat. This is the man who's actually going to create a effective European superstate. We should be very grateful to him.
You could well be right. Is there any consolation in seeing this as largely a Trump phenomenon, that things go back more to the way they were when he's gone? Or is there a bigger risk that it now becomes the new normal, that a US retreat from Europe into a more isolationist shell will continue beyond the Trump years?
Well, I think just as we have a Russia problem, not a Putin problem, and our problems with Russia predate Putin and will outlast him, I think that Trump is a symptom of the way in which America is changing. It's a very unpleasant symptom, but I would say that the roots of this go way back. I think the Biden presidency was disastrous. We could have won this war at the beginning if they hadn't dithered and shilly-shallied. I was obviously very critical of Trump. Trump won, although in retrospect he doesn't look nearly as bad as Trump too. I was very critical of Obama, and I was critical of George W. Bush. So I think that America has been disengaging from Europe for a while. And the fact we now are dealing with the consequences is partly because we weren't looking. And I think that the view in America has changed as well. That generation who maybe knew about the Normandy beaches and the Berlin airlift from their parents, who remembered the Cold War, who'd seen Reagan speaking at the Brandenburg Gate saying, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That generation is going, and the modern America doesn't see Europe the same way as their parents and grandparents did, and they worry about other stuff. And they quite rightly say, we need to fix America at home. We're bleeding. And why are we spending treasure and incurring risk and sending our boys to go to protect 500 million Europeans against 140 million Russians when we have 1 billion Chinese to worry about?
We'll leave it there, Edward. Thank you for that, the code dash of common sense and reality. Thank you for joining me on Times Radio. Edward Lucas there, Times column.